Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, everyone.
Right.
Hopefully you should all be able to see my PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
So, thumbs up, good.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to my presentation. I gave this presentation to Sutherland Group back in March, and I really just wanted to talk about the diversity of fruits and seeds. And that's because we do tend to focus on how spectacular our native flowers are, but I thought, well, let's just have a look at the fruits and seeds as well. So in this presentation, I just have to move to the next slide, yes. What I thought I'd do is just talk about some botanical basics in terms of the life cycle of going from the flower to the fruit and the seed. Most of the talk is really just about the diversity of our fruits and seeds, from sort of hard and woody to fleshy and inedible. But I'll also just talk briefly about using our fruits for identification and also just touch on some propagation. Okay. Well, starting off with some botanical basics. Now, this slide is the one that has the most text on it, so never fear, there are more photos to come. So in terms of the very basic definition, a fruit is described as the structure that encloses and protects the seed. Not all plants have fruits, but most do. Now, as I said, I really wanted to focus on the great diversity of our fruits, and there are a couple of terms that crop up a lot, not that I actually would use these terms much myself in normal conversation. So fruits that are dehiscent are fruits that dry out and split open, and then there are also fruits that are the opposite, called indehiscent, which means they don't split open. Probably the easiest way to think about diversity is the hard and woody fruits, which might be called follicles, capsules, or pods. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got those very fleshy fruits. And there are two terms that come up there to describe fleshy fruits. That's berries that have the seeds in the flesh versus drupes that just have one seed in a very hard casing. So as we'll see, there's certainly a lot of diversity. And the question really is, well, why is there so much diversity? Well, just as our native flowers have diversity in their structure to ensure their pollination, the fruits and seeds are also very diverse to ensure plants can survive through being able to disperse their seeds in different ways. So one way of thinking about that is that, of course, our native plants have co-evolved over thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years with animals and the environment. So there's a whole process of evolution going on over time. Right, I'll just talk a little bit here about the life cycle of how you move from, well, through all the different parts of the life cycle. So I think once you sort of understand the basic concept of the life cycle, when you look at a plant and you see a part of it, it helps you work out where the plant is in that life cycle. So if we just start off very simply with a seed that grows into a seedling that then produces flowers, those flowers produce fruits that then release seeds, and then that process starts again. And if we have a look at that little diagram I've got there, I'm not sure, I don't really have a pointer, but if we have a look at the anther is the male part of the flower structure that releases 2 grains of pollen onto the stigma, and then those grains of pollen move down the style all the way down to the ovary at the bottom, where fertilization occurs, and then that ovary develops the seeds, and the ovary often changes shape, so it becomes bigger, and then other parts of the flower sort of die off or change in their structure. Now, some plants are self-pollinated, where the anther from one plant can pollinate the stigma on the same plant, and that can produce fertile seeds, whereas other plants need to be cross-pollinated. So the anther needs, or the pollen from the anther needs to go onto the stigma of a different plant, like a different actual shrub, obviously still in the same species. And people that have heard me in my talk on Joseph Banks would know that I'm very keen on this book by Philippa Nikolinsky, who's an artist. She produced a lovely book called Banksia Nzi, and in it, she has lots of drawings of the life cycle of the Banksia. And I'm just sort of going to flick through it on the screen, even though it's not probably going to come out very well, just to give you an idea of how a Banksia moves through that process to produce from the flower to the fruit and the seed. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about Banksias because it's a really good way to, they're nice and big, so it's sort of good to explain the concept. So when you see a Banksia flower spike, that spike is actually made up of many individual flowers. And on something like Banksia grandis, there can be up to 6,000 individual flowers on one particular flower spike. But as the way is in the natural environment, not all of those flowers will produce fruits and seeds. So if we have a look at Banksias, say for that whole flower spike, maybe less than 2% of all those flowers will actually develop into a woody seed follicle and actually have a fertile seed. And if we look at the Banksia, those woody seed follicles there you can see on the screen often need heat to split them open and release the seed. And with the Banksias, some of the follicles actually stay and the seeds can stay on the plants, so they don't over a couple of seasons. And I might just point out here actually that a lot of the photos I'm using in today's presentation do come from the CD-ROM that Sutherland Group produced back in 2006, and that was on coastal plants of the Royal National Park. It does have over 300 species of our local plants. So I'm using a lot of photos from that simply because they're actually easily available, and it can be hard to get photos of fruits and seeds. So that one there is just from our CG, Banksia sriracha. Just moving on to a different genus, just looking at Eucalyptus. And I think the Eucalyptus is where people, if you just happen to, see something, you can actually be really confused as to what part of the life cycle you're looking at. So this particular diagram is from a fantastic little book that I found called Seed Collection of Australian Native Plants. It has some great little diagrams. And this one just shows the pictures. So starting with one, that's what the flower buds look like. And then the buds, the cap sort of flips off the flower bud, the operculum, the flowers start to open. And then the base of that flower, the ovary structure, develops in 3 into the immature fruit. And then in 4, the fruits mature as the seeds develop. And then 5, you've got the little valves open of the capsule and release the tiny individual seeds inside. So just sort of remember that life cycle from the flower buds through to the woody fruits, sort of green through to woody. And we've just got some photos here of Eucalyptus pilaris from our CD. So you've got the green flower buds. That flower photo, you can see that some flowers open, but also some flower buds that haven't quite opened. So the flowers will open at different stages on the plant, and that's to give the plant the best chance at just distributing its seed for survival. And then the third picture, you've got the woody fruit there. That looks sort of quite old and dry, and so all the seed has been released there. Just some other examples of what the fruits of eucalyptus look like. Marginata, liminalis, and also the little individual seeds drawn to scale to give you an idea of just how tiny they are. The other thing I might just point out with this diagram here is if you look at marginata at the top, the top of the capsule, the little valves are sort of inside the capsule. And if you look at the little diagram below, you can see the valves are exerted and they're sort of above the capsule and opening up. So that's one of the ID features for eucalyptus, looking at those valves on the capsules. Okay, moving on to another genus, looking at Grevelias. So here we have Grebelia buxofolia, again from our CD. So you can see the lovely flower there. And then you can also see on the right-hand side, you can still see the style at the top, but you can see that green bit below. That's where the ovary has swollen and developed, and that's where the seeds are maturing. So it's still a little bit green there. And another one is Grebelia cronulata, one of our local ones with that green spider flower. And again, you can still see, I'm getting my left and right mixed up, on the right-hand side, the little style, which has died off and gone black. And then you've got the ovary that's swollen to become the fruit is looking quite sort of black and dried there. And just talking about some of the hybrids and cultivars that we have in our gardens, particularly a lot of the Grevelias. Not all the hybrids will actually produce their own seeds. And I actually took this at a relative's house, someone who wasn't familiar with plants. And when they saw this flower spike on the left side on their Grebelia, they actually didn't know what it was. And they thought something was wrong with the plant. And I think that just highlights how people don't necessarily sort of understand that full life cycle of our native plants. And it was only actually a couple of days later that I took the photo on the bottom right there, where you can see, so this is the same flower spike, you can see how the fruits have dried and they're opened, but they actually didn't have any seeds in them. So the fruit has dried, split open, but there were actually no seeds to release because it's a hybrid, doesn't have seeds at all. Peter can probably tell us more at the end. There are some of the hybrid Grevelias that do have seeds. Okay, now for something different. Our local Gaimia lily, because it's so tall, we probably very rarely actually see what the top of the flower stalk looks like and what the fruit and the seeds of the Gaimia lily look like. And so I've just got a diagram there, which we actually used on one of our signs at Joseph Banks Reserve. And you can see, the different parts of the fruit and the tiny seeds. And then we've got a photo there on the right from our CD, just showing parts of the fruit. But yeah, I think the Gaimia lily is just so dominated by the flower that you don't even stop to think about what the fruit and the seeds that might look like, because it is just so tall. Okay, moving on to another local plant that's very showy. So we've got our Angophora hispana, and certainly when that's in flower, it's very spectacular. But if you have a look at the next stage after that flower has started to die, on the right, you can see it looks almost as spectacular because you really get that lovely red colour as the flowers are starting to die off and the plant's sort of moving into that next phase of producing the woody fruit. You can still see some dead flower parts around the base of the capsules there. Fruits are very important for identifying many species of plants. As I said, we do tend to focus a lot on the flowers, but the fruits can be just as important for identification, particularly for some genera and species. And so back when Joseph Banks was collecting plants in Australia and the artists were making drawings, you can see how this example of Banksia serrata, they drew not only the flower, but also the flower spike. And you can see the woody follicles there, and you can see that some of them are open. So they're really illustrating all the important parts of the plant in that particular drawing. And then also on the right, Grebelia Banksii. This is by Ferdinand Bauer. So you can see there's just so many parts of the flower being illustrated there. So you've not only got the actual flower, but on the bottom right, you can see the dead flower, and then what the individual fruits and seeds look like as well. So that was really conveying a lot of information there in just one drawing. So if you think about how you can use fruits for identification, you can use fruits to distinguish between families. So if something is, in the Fabaceae family and it's got a seed pod or a sort of a legume, compared to something in the Myrtaceae family, which is going to have a very small capsule with very fine seed. And then if you think about within a particular family like Proteaceae and just thinking about different genera, so one way to distinguish between the isopogons and the petrophilies is by the fruit, where the isopogons in that bottom left photo have that round flower structure and round fruit, whereas the petrophilies have that more elongated cone-shaped fruit. That petrophily is the photo that I took over near the coal loader at Waverton, just on a sort of a council footpath strip. And I was just amazed by how many different fruits had been, or cones had been produced on one particular end of the branch there. I think I counted, might have been 11 or 13. It was so hard to take a photo of it. Whatever angle, it was just hard to capture all of them. And then, as I've already shown earlier, the fruits can also be used to identify particular species within a genus such as Eucalyptus, particularly whether the valves are sort of inserted or exserted. And then another interesting example of the fruit is what might look like a eucalypt sort of from a distance, but the Syncarpia glomulifera, which is the turpentine, that's the one that has the fused spaceship fruit. Now I'm just going to hold up, you can just see, I don't know whether you can see, hang on. Yeah, so this is the fruit I'm talking about anyway. So if you just look at the name, the genus name there, so Syncarpia, syn means with or together, and carpia is a word for fruit. So when you have Syncarpia, it means the fruit is all together and all the capsules are fused together, whereas in, say, Eucalyptus, the individual capsules are all separate. But in the Syncarpia, put my right page there. Okay, that's not working so well. Okay, but I'm sure you're familiar with that Syncarpia, the turpentine, where the fruit gives, sometimes people call it a spaceship because it looks so unusual and they're all fused together there. Okay, what I just thought I'd talk about is some species names of plants that are about the fruit. And here it's useful to keep in mind two words that refer to the fruit or the seed. So if you see carpa, carpum, or carpus in a name, that's referring to the fruit. And if you see sperma or spermum in the name, that's referring to the seed. So I've just got some examples of these here. So if you think about species names that refer to the size of the fruit, some examples there are Eucalyptus macrocarpa. So macrocarpa means big fruit, macro plus carpa. And there's also a tea tree, a leptospermum, that's called macrocarpa as well, referring to obviously a species that has a particularly big fruit within that genus. There are also some plant names that refer to the shape of the fruit. Some of our common local plants, we've got Xylomelium piriform, also known as the woody pear. And so piriform means pear-shaped. So that's a species name that refers to that very distinctive shape of the fruit in that top picture there. Another local plant that you just see so often on our local bushwalks is Dodonaea triquetra. This is a plant that doesn't look very distinguished when it's in normal leaf or even when it's in flower, It's really only when it has that papery fruit that you notice it. And the papery fruit actually has 3 sides to the fruit. So if you look at that photo there on the bottom, you can sort of see that the fruit actually has 3 sides. And so triquetra, tri means 3 and quetra means side. So you get 3-sided fruit there. Another example of a name that refers to the shape is our Tetragonia tetragonioides, which is our Warrigal Greens or native spinach. And so the name tetragonioides, actually the genus name Tetragonia, means tetra means 4, and the gonia part means the sides or the angles. And I've just got a photo on the next slide. So I know that I had always been so focused on, the tetragonia, the native spinach. I was always focused on the leaves, and I had no idea what the fruit even looked like. And one day at Joseph Banks Reserve, I just noticed near one of our plants all these things on the ground. And when I looked more carefully, I realised it was the fruit of the Warrigal Greens, and the fruit did actually have quite an angular structure to it, and it did look like it had 4 sides. Well, okay, well, that's where the name comes from. But it wasn't something I'd ever really noticed until I actually saw them all on the ground there. And you can get a sense of the scale there with a couple of leaves and some gravel on the footpath. Okay, and this is another photo from a plant at Joseph Banks Reserve at Corilla. This is Grebelia Heliosperma. So helio means sun, and so it's referring to the shape of the seed being like a sun. So it's very round, it's very spherical. And when I first saw this seed on the ground at Joseph Banks Reserve, I really didn't know what it was. It didn't look like any of our local hakeas at all. And so I sort of hunted around, and I'm not sure whether it actually had a label or not. And then I came home and sort of did a bit of Googling, and I realised, although it looks very much like a hakea seed, it is a Grebelia. And the species name does refer to that very distinctive shape. Here as well, I don't know. No, that's not really working very well. Okay. I'm just trying to show that. Okay, just to give some more examples about plant names that refer to the fruit. There are also some names that refer to how the fruit tastes. So the very well-known Ostromyrtus dulcis, which is one of those really common bush tucker plants that's nice and safe to plant in kindergartens because it doesn't have any prickly leaves and it's not too big and it grows in shade. Dulcis actually means sweet, and so that's referring to the edible berry. And even though to our palates, when we're used to such sweetened food, it's not particularly sweet compared to a lot of other fruits of native plants, it is sweet. And some people say it even has a bit of a cinnamony type sort of flavour. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Leptomeria acida, the native currant, where acida refers to the very tart taste of the berry. Another example of a name that refers to the fruit is our local tree, Angophora costata, where costata refers to the ribbed captions of the fruit there you can see in the photo. And then there are also some names that refer to the colour of the fruit. So in this case, Auranticarpa, which used to be Pittosporum, that refers to the goldy orange colour of the fruit. So you've got carpa fruit, and then AUR, coming from the Latin name for gold, aureus, that's referring to the colour of the fruit. Okay, just having a look at some of the diversity of our fruit. So within our within the Proteaceae family, You often read in books that, Proteaceae have fruits that split open in a V shape, and many of them are woody. And you think, okay, Banksia, yes, that the follicles split open in, half. Hakea, yes. Grebelia, yes. Lambertia with the mountain devil, yes. Even the woody pear, yes. And then you get to Warrigal, and then, well, it's got those sort of leathery follicles. It's not really sort of woody, but they do split open sort of down the middle. And then you get to Petunia, which really doesn't fit that description at all, where the petunias actually have their fruits of fleshy drupes. They look like grapes, but they're definitely not woody, and they don't split open. So even when I think it just highlights the diversity of fruits within a family like Proteaceae, where you can sort of read sort of one description of what they're all like, but then there's an example where it doesn't meet that. And I've just got a slide here showing some of the diverse fruits in the Proteaceae family. The mountain devil there, you can see a green one and a woody one just starting to split open. The woody pear, Petunia, and the isopogon fruit there, really seeing the round drumstick shape. Quite another genus which has quite different fruit is the Fabaceae family. So they have pods or legume-like fruits, and those pods split open to release their seeds. With a number of species in the Acacia genus, the size and shapes of the pods are very important for ID. And of course, the acacias have tiny flowers, but they produce much bigger seed pods than you might expect from something so small. But as we know from the life cycle, that pod has come from that tiny flower. I've just got a couple of photos there of another plant at Joseph Banks Reserve, the senna, the silver senna, Temesioides, which looks spectacular in flower, but it also looks really interesting when it's got all its seed pods on it, just due to their colour. I've just got some examples of some Acacia seed pods here. You can just see the diversity, and they're all at different stages of development there as well. And then we have things like Casuarina, where you really don't take much notice of the flowers at all. It's really the fruit that is more dominant, and it's the fruit that's used for ID of many of the species, the shape, the size, whether there are points on the end of the fruit or not. So moving away from the hard and woody fruits, and just having a look at some of the fleshy fruits. So it's often rainforest type plants that will have fleshy fruits, and they can be quite brightly coloured because they're trying to attract animals to find and eat them in low light conditions. And the fruit is also often larger and fleshier because there's simply more moisture around to put into the fruit. So you might think they're about some of the lily pillies, which are well known as sort of bush tucker plants as well. Turn them into jams with lots of sugar, and of course our local Pittosporum with the bright orange fruit. When we talk about some of the fleshy fruits, a lot of our plants have common names that are about the fruit, and you might think that they're sort of fruit trees, but really the common name is not a reliable indication of whether the fruit is edible or not, and often the fruit can in fact be toxic. So things like kangaroo apple, definitely do not eat that one. And even our blueberry ash might look like a blueberry, but I don't know anyone who would eat that at all. And then, of course, you've got a cheese tree, where the common name just refers to the really distinctive fruit that looks like a little cheese, particularly when it's ripe. It looks like a camembert when it's ripe, and then it sort of starts to split open. And with the cheese tree, the fruits will change colour as they mature. So that changing colour is a sign of when the seeds are ready as well. So moving from green to red. And then what about nuts? Now, I was a little bit reluctant to put this in because it sort of does open up, go into a whole new area. So nuts are a form of fruit, because they do contain a seed, but nuts do not split open. I've just got two examples there. So obviously the macadamia is a very well-known Australian plant that has a nut as its fruit. And I've just put there the actual sort of technical description of what it is. So it's a fruit, is a hard, woody globose follicle. This means it's round. It's got that hard shell, has a little bit of a point, and it does contain 1 or 2 seeds, but the actual seeds are tiny. They've just got a lot of that edible matter around them. And then another sort of, not really a nut, but we've got the macrozamia, where the seeds form into that pineapple-shaped structure, and the seeds do have a lot of starch in them, and they were eaten by Aboriginal people, but only after a lot of treatment to remove the toxicity from the seeds. And that red colour of the mature seeds is a sign of the toxicity as well, just to sort of steer clear of them. Just a few slides to finish, and just talking about how you move from the plant producing the fruit to actually dispersing the seeds. So the fruit contains the seeds, but the seeds need to be dispersed to allow the plant to continue to survive. So the different processes for the pollination of flowers versus seed dispersal, but there are similar mechanisms involved. So animals eat the fruit and distribute the seeds. So birds and small mammals will eat the fruits, but also air and water are involved in seed dispersal, where a fruit can split open and then through gravity, the seed will fall to the ground, or it might be propelled with great force, and then the wind and water can disperse that seed further. Heat and fire are also important in causing fruits to open, and of course sometimes for the seeds to germinate later as well, although that's more the smoke, the qualities in the smoke, the chemicals. Just a slide about how you propagate from fruits. I think probably the hardest thing is working out which part of the plant is the fruit and which part is the seed. So when you're collecting fruits or trying to propagate from them, just trying to work out which part is which, and then also being aware of when they're mature enough, so that also they're fertile and mature and worth collecting. So often it's looking for things like the colour and the hardness and the fruit opening, which are all signs. And then depending on whether the fruit is hard or soft, there are different ways to extract the seed. Sometimes it's just a matter of squashing the fruit, something like a Dianella to get the seed out. With something like a Banksia, you might need to heat it, dry it out and heat it to allow the follicle to open. And just a final slide about the role of native fruits in popular culture. So May Gibbs had her Banksia men in Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie, which were quite scary for lots of young children, I'm sure. And then our National Arboretum in Canberra has a playground which features pods. And although the acorn pods are probably the most distinctive, they do have some Banksia cones there, which are used as sort of little sort of huts and play structures. And then I thought I'd give a special shout out to Mary. Is Mary wearing her fruit jewellery there? Good, we might have a closer look at that later. And then my final slide. Sorry, oops, no. That's my final slide. I suppose I wanted to emphasize that we do tend to focus on our flowers because they're so spectacular, but I think our fruits can be just as spectacular and diverse. I do have a collection of things which, if I was doing this in person, I would show you. Even things like, I didn't mention, you can see this great big casuarina cone, which is so different from our local ones. A lot of the rainforest fruits are so spectacular. And the reason there's so much diversity is because plants have co-evolved with the environment to make sure that they can continue to survive. So they have to get their fruits and get their seeds out there to ensure their survival. And because the fruits are so diverse, it means you can use the fruits for identification, and you just need to be aware of those different characteristics if you do want to propagate from them. So I just wanted to mention again those two books that I found really useful, Seed Collection of Australian Native Plants. And then for things like rainforest fruits, which are really quite different from what we see locally, you know, I've got a book, Australian Rainforest Seeds, gives you a really good guide to the colour there. And you can really see just from that cover how bright some of those some of the rainforest seeds are. Okay, so I know I've whipped through that, and it is a bit difficult without being able to show you some of the things I've collected over time. But what I might do now is stop sharing my screen and maybe see if people have any questions. So I'll just go to stop share and go back to see everyone. And if anyone has any questions or even comments about interesting fruits you've come across in your travels, do let me know.